Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling how to make learning stick.
Ooh, that's a good one.
You've given me a fantastic mix of sources for this one.
Yeah,
We've got some cognitive science, some practical classroom tips, all sorts of things.
all works.
We are going to bust some learning myths,
Love it.
uncover the secrets of memory.
Yes,
Think of this as your cheat sheet to becoming a learning ninja.
I love it. A learning ninja.
Right.
So one of the things that I find so fascinating about this topic is that often we think we're learning when we're really not.
Okay.
And the book Uncommon Sense Teaching really dives deep into this with a couple of student examples.
Okay.
Like Katina, who, bombs her math test despite feeling confident,
Oh, yeah.
and Jared, who just can't seem to grasp Spanish.
They're both putting in the effort,
Right.
but then when test time comes, poof.
Gone.
Gone.
Vanished.
What's going on there?
Well, the book really cleverly highlights the difference between working memory and long-term memory.
Oh, this is good.
Working memory is like that stack of papers that's precariously sitting on your desk and, one wrong move and the whole thing collapses.
You know that feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Long-term memory is really more like building a foundation brick by brick.
So Katina and Jared, they might be keeping up in class,
Well-
they're contributing,
They think they're learning.
but they're not building that foundation. They're just juggling it all.
Juggling, exactly.
In a working memory.
Yeah. And what that means for you listening is recognizing, are you just temporarily holding on to information, or are you truly integrating it
Oh, that's good.
into your understanding?
Yeah.
So it's really about building those foundational blocks.
Uh-huh.
And the book argues this isn't just about learning styles or even having a growth mindset.
Okay.
While those are important, understanding how memory works is key to making learning truly stick.
Now, this next part really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah.
The book talks about race car brains versus hiker brains.
I love that analogy.
It's like some people zoom through learning and others take a more scenic route.
Right. And neither approach is inherently superior.
Okay.
The book actually uses economist Friedrich Hayek as an example.
Oh, cool.
He realized his slower processing actually helped him spot gaps and assumptions that faster learners missed, leading to some of his most innovative breakthroughs.
So it's not just about speed, but depth.
Exactly.
How we process information.
That's right.
This reminds me of another point that came up from our sources about the two neural pathways of learning, declarative and procedural.
Absolutely. So declarative learning is like taking notes.
Yeah.
It's about consciously absorbing facts and concepts.
Textbooks,
Yeah.
lectures, definitions.
All of that.
Okay.
Procedural learning, however, is where we move from knowing about something to actually doing it.
Okay.
It's subconscious.
Like riding a bike.
Yes. Playing an instrument, mastering a software program.
So declarative is knowing that procedural is knowing how.
I love that.
Like you can memorize all the rules of grammar, but to actually speak a language, you need procedural.
Exactly.
Okay.
And both systems are essential, but in different ways.
Okay.
Take physics, for instance. You can memorize Maxwell's equations.
Okay.
That's declarative learning.
Got it.
But you won't truly understand electricity and magnetism until you apply those equations to actually design something like a radio antenna.
Oh, so procedural.
Procedural.
Okay.
So it's moving beyond the knowing about to the actual doing.
Okay. So how do we apply all of this, let's say, to learning a new language?
Oh, that's a good one.
Do we ditch the flashcards
Right.
and just start chatting?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
The sources, and particularly Uncommon Sense Teaching, argue that direct instruction is actually highly effective,
Okay.
especially for those of us with limited working memory capacity.
And that's probably most of us.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is key, direct instruction isn't about passively listening to a lecture.
So it's not the teacher just droning on and the students are spacing out.
It's about the teacher actively engaging students, breaking down information into bite-sized pieces,
Mhm.
and providing lots of guided practice with feedback.
Okay.
Think of it as I do, we do, you do.
I like that.
So the teacher first models the skill or the concept, then they guide the students through practicing it together. And finally, students practice on their own, getting support as needed.
I'm starting to see how this connects to those earlier examples of students struggling even though they feel like they're getting it.
Yes.
Maybe their practice wasn't actually hitting the mark.
Exactly. And our sources really go deep into making practice truly count.
Okay.
One fascinating technique is interleaving.
Interleaving.
It's about mixing up different types of problems during practice instead of just focusing on one thing at a time.
Okay.
Think of it as cross-training for your brain.
So instead of doing all the multiplication problems and then all the division problems, you'd mix them up.
Exactly. And that forces your brain to work harder and strengthens those neural connections.
Okay.
And then there's spaced repetition.
Space repetition.
Revisiting information at increasing intervals to really make it stick in long-term memory.
It's like tending a garden.
Yes.
You can't just plant the seeds and walk away.
Exactly.
You got to water them. You got to give them time to grow.
You got to nurture them.
This is making me rethink my entire study routine.
I know, me too.
Spacing things out, mixing them up.
And these techniques really tie into this idea of desirable difficulty.
Okay.
It's like that saying, no pain, no gain. If learning feels too easy, we're probably not pushing ourselves enough to make it stick.
And that's why just rereading notes or passively listening to a podcast isn't enough.
Exactly. You have to actually wrestle with the material.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make mistakes. You have to learn from them.
Okay, so we've got these tools for memory and practice.
Right.
But our sources also talked about the importance of the learning environment itself. It's not just about individual effort.
Absolutely. Creating a strong classroom community is crucial, whether that's in a physical space or online. Establishing clear habits and routines helps free up mental bandwidth for actual learning.
It's like having a designated workspace.
Yes.
It signals to your brain, okay, it's time to focus.
That's right.
Versus I'm just kind of,
All over the place.
all over the place. Yeah. And I'm also having to think about, how do I participate?
Exactly.
Where do I go to ask for help?
Right. And then there's collaborative learning,
Okay.
which is so much more than just group work.
Okay.
When it's done well, it can boost social skills, it can reduce stress, and it creates this sense of belonging.
Yeah.
It's about really leveraging the power of peer interaction to support and deepen learning.
Our sources highlighted this point that when students feel comfortable
Right.
and supported, they're more likely to take risks.
Ask questions.
Engage deeply.
Engage deeply
Yes.
with the material.
And this ties into addressing the imposter syndrome, which so many of us experience, even outside of academics.
Oh, absolutely.
That feeling of inadequacy and be a major obstacle to learning. So it's not just about teaching the content, it's creating a space where students feel safe and empowered to learn.
That's exactly it. And these principles go beyond the classroom. They apply to anyone who wants to learn and grow, whether you're picking up a new skill or deepening your understanding of a hobby or even navigating a career change.
It's about recognizing that learning is not just something we do in school. It's a fundamental part of being human.
It's how we adapt and grow and thrive in a world that's constantly changing.
Well said. Now let's explore how these principles translate to the online world, because our sources offer a ton of insights on making online learning truly effective.
Yeah.
One that jumps out is multimedia learning,
Oh, yes.
engaging both auditory and visual channels for stronger learning.
That's right. It's like watching a movie with a great soundtrack.
Yes.
The combination of the sights and the sounds really creates a more immersive and memorable experience.
And we also see a lot about asynchronous learning, using short, focused videos, quizzes, discussion forums to reinforce concepts and encourage that retrieval practice we talked about.
Exactly.
Allows for flexibility and personalization.
Absolutely.
Think online courses, podcasts, even apps.
Yes.
Designed for learning.
But it's important to make even asynchronous learning feel personal and engaging.
Okay.
The sources emphasize building an online presence even when you're not interacting with students in real time.
So it's not just posting a pre-recorded lecture
Exactly.
and calling it a day.
It's about being present even when you're not physically present.
You have to think about building connections, fostering community, even in a virtual space.
That's right. And it ties back to one of our core themes here. Understanding how the brain learns can empower us in all areas of life.
This is making me think about how I approach online courses. I usually just passively listen to lectures,
Yeah.
which we now know is not the most effective
Right.
way to learn.
So you got to be more active.
I got to be more active.
Yeah.
Maybe take notes, summarize key points, even explain the concepts to someone else.
Absolutely. Those are great ideas.
Okay, now let's switch gears and talk lesson planning, because our sources encourage an uncommon sense approach. What does that even mean?
It means moving beyond that standard textbook format to craft truly engaging and effective lessons.
Okay.
It's about being thoughtful and intentional, understanding that a good lesson is a journey, not just a destination.
I like that. So where does this journey begin?
Well, it starts with setting clear objectives.
Okay.
What do we want students to know, understand, and be able to do by the end of this lesson?
So instead of just vaguely aiming to teach about photosynthesis,
Right.
You define specific skills or concepts they should master.
Exactly. That clarity helps us choose the right activities, the right assessments, and then we need a killer hook.
Ooh, a hook.
Yes, to capture student interest and make the learning relevant.
It's like that opening scene in a movie that grabs your attention.
Exactly.
Makes you want to see what happens next.
You want to spark curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
create a sense of anticipation.
So instead of just launching into a lecture on, say, the American Revolution,
Right.
you might start with a compelling story.
A thought-provoking question.
A thought-provoking question.
A piece of music from that era.
Ooh, I like that.
Do you want to set the stage?
Yeah.
And then comes the heart of the lesson, where we need to strike that balance between direct instruction and student-directed learning.
Our sources are very clear that both approaches have their place.
Absolutely.
Direct instruction is essential for laying that foundation.
Especially with new or complex material.
Yes, but student-directed learning allows students to apply what they've learned, explore their own interests.
Develop greater independence.
I was thinking about this earlier. It's like you wouldn't just throw someone in the deep end of the pool without teaching them how to swim first.
Exactly.
Direct instruction provides those essential swimming lessons.
Yes.
And then student-directed learning is like letting them explore the pool on their own and develop their skills and confidence.
It's about gradually releasing responsibility to students as they become more competent learners.
Okay, so we've got our objectives.
Right.
We've got our hook.
Yes.
And a plan for balancing those different teaching approaches.
Right.
What about those students who just don't seem motivated?
Yes. Addressing resistance and tapping into student motivation, that's a big part of effective teaching.
Because let's be real, students come to the table with a diverse range of experiences, attitudes, motivations.
Exactly.
Some are eager to learn.
Right.
Others might be dealing with things outside of school
Absolutely.
that are impacting their ability to focus.
That's right.
And then you have those who've just developed habits that are getting in the way.
Yes. And one of our sources had a fascinating take on how we sometimes unintentionally enable those counterproductive habits.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
They talk about this concept of mirroring, where you reflect dysfunctional team behavior back on the student who is causing the problems.
Oh, interesting.
So it's about holding them accountable without resorting to punishment.
Can you give an example of how that might work?
Absolutely. Let's say you have a student named Jack who consistently relies on his group members to do all the work.
Classic Jack.
Right. So instead of constantly picking up his slack, the teacher might tell Jack that his name won't be included on the group's work unless he contributes meaningfully.
That makes sense. You're setting clear boundaries and expectations while also protecting the other group members from being taken advantage of.
It's also about helping Jack develop self-awareness and accountability.
Right?
Sometimes students need to experience the natural consequences of their actions in order to learn and grow.
This is making me think about those times when I've procrastinated on projects or avoided challenging tasks.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I needed someone to hold up that mirror
Right.
and help me see those patterns.
It's a reminder that these principles apply to all of us, not just students in a traditional classroom setting.
They can help us become more effective learners.
And more resilient individuals.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From the science of memory and the power of practice to the importance of building a strong classroom community and even tackling student resistance. What else can we expect in this deep dive?
Well, now that we've laid the foundation, we can explore some of the more nuanced aspects of teaching and learning. We'll delve into this concept of neural recycling,
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
how our brains have adapted to learn things we haven't evolved to do naturally,
I'm intrigued.
like reading and math.
Wow.
And we'll also talk about the limitations of working memory.
This is making me realize just how much I've taken my own brain for granted.
It's this incredibly complex machine
Yes.
that we're only just beginning to understand.
And that's what's so exciting about learning.
It's a journey of discovery,
Absolutely.
both about the world around us and about ourselves.
I love that.
You know, one thing that really struck me from all these sources
Yeah.
is how much our understanding of learning has evolved.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we used to think
Yeah.
that teaching was just about delivering information,
Mm-hmm.
and learning was simply absorbing it.
Right, like a pitcher pouring knowledge into empty cups.
Exactly. But now we know it's so much more complex.
Yes.
Learning is an active process.
Hmm.
It's about building connections,
Making meaning.
making meaning, applying what we've learned in different situations.
And that's where this concept of neural recycling comes in, right?
Oh, yes.
One source mentioned our brains have had to adapt to learn things we haven't evolved to do naturally, like reading and math.
It's fascinating that source explained how these skills actually rewire parts of our brains.
Wow.
that were originally used for other purposes.
So our brains are constantly evolving and adapting to the demands of the modern world.
That's right.
It's not just a fixed set of abilities.
Exactly. And this has major implications for how we teach.
Okay.
We can't assume students will automatically pick up these complex skills.
Right.
We need to provide the support and scaffolding they need to build those neural pathways.
Which brings us back to direct instruction.
Yes.
When done well, it can be so powerful.
It is.
For laying that foundation, especially for new or challenging material.
Absolutely.
It's about breaking down complex information into manageable chunks.
Yes.
Providing clear explanations and offering lots of opportunities for practice and feedback.
That's right. And one of our sources had a great point about the limitations of working memory.
Oh, yeah. We can only hold so much information in our minds at once.
It's like trying to juggle too many balls. Eventually, you're going to drop something.
Perfect analogy.
And it highlights the importance of pacing and chunking information.
Okay.
We need to give students and ourselves time to digest what we're learning.
Make connections.
Make connections, practice applying it.
This makes me think about those times I've tried to learn something new and I just felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information.
It happens.
Maybe I was trying to cram too much in at once.
It's a common experience. We often try to rush the learning process, but our brains simply can't process information effectively when it's overloaded.
And that's where those active learning strategies come in.
Exactly.
So instead of just passively listening to a lecture or reading a textbook, we need to be actively engaged with the material.
Absolutely. Whether it's through discussions or problem-solving activities, or even just jotting down key points in our own words.
Okay.
We need to be actively processing the information to make it stick.
One source talked about retrieve taking, where students don't take notes while the teacher's talking. Instead, they jot down the main points after the teacher pauses.
I like that.
So it forces you to really pay attention.
Yes, and think about what's being said.
Yeah.
It's a great way to encourage retrieval practice, which strengthens those long-term memory connections.
And speaking of strengthening connections, feedback is essential. Students need to know how they're doing what they're doing well, where they need to improve, but just saying, good job or try harder isn't enough, is it?
Not really. Feedback needs to be specific and actionable.
Okay.
We need to tell students exactly what they're doing well and provide clear steps they can take to improve.
I'm thinking back to Katina, who was struggling with those math tests.
Right.
Maybe she wasn't getting that specific feedback.
Exactly.
To identify her weaknesses.
And develop strategies to overcome them.
That's a great point. Feedback is crucial for helping students understand their own learning process.
Yes.
And develop those metacognitive skills.
That's right. It's not just about correcting mistakes. It's about empowering students to become more effective learners.
And that brings us back to the idea of desirable difficulty.
Yes.
Maybe Katina was relying on study strategies that felt comfortable.
Right.
But weren't actually helping her learn deeply.
It's so easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah, we all gravitate toward what feels familiar and effortless. But sometimes the most effective learning strategies are the ones that feel the most challenging.
One source had a great analogy about this.
Okay.
They talked about soccer players practicing more with their stronger leg because it feels more gratifying.
Okay.
But that could lead to peg leg syndrome, where the weaker leg doesn't get the practice it needs.
I've never heard that term.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
But it's a great reminder that we need to challenge ourselves and our students.
To push beyond our comfort zones.
To push beyond our comfort zones and embrace those desirable difficulties that lead to deeper understanding.
It's like weightlifting.
Yes.
If you only lift weights that are easy to manage,
you're not going to build any muscle.
You're not going to see those gains.
Exactly. And that's why simply rereading notes or passively listening to a podcast isn't enough.
Right.
You have to actively engage with the material, make mistakes,
Yeah.
and learn from them.
Okay, so we've established that effective learning requires effort and challenge.
It does.
But what are some specific strategies we can use to make that effort more productive?
Well, we've already touched on a few, like retrieve taking and spaced repetition.
Right.
But another powerful technique is interleaving.
Right. We talked about mixing up different types of problems during practice instead of focusing on one thing at a time.
Exactly.
It's like cross-training for your brain.
Interleaving forces us to constantly retrieve information, make connections, and apply what we've learned in different contexts. It's a much more effective way to learn than simply practicing one skill or concept until we feel like we've mastered it.
This makes me think about how I usually study for exams.
Oh, yeah.
I tend to focus on one subject at a time, but maybe I should start mixing things up.
I think it's worth trying.
Yeah, and see if that helps me retain the information better.
And don't forget about spaced repetition.
Yeah.
Revisiting information at increasing intervals is crucial for solidifying those long-term memory connections.
It's like tending a garden. You can't just plant the seeds and walk away. You need to water them regularly.
Weed out any distractions.
Weed out any distractions and give them time to grow.
That's a beautiful analogy, and it highlights the importance of patience and persistence in the learning process.
Real learning takes time and effort.
It does.
And ongoing attention, it's not a quick fix or a one-time event.
It's a journey, not a destination.
It is. Speaking of journeys,
Yes.
let's talk about lesson planning.
Okay.
Our sources had some really interesting insights on how to create engaging and effective lessons.
They did. One thing that stood out to me was the importance of the hook.
Yes, the hook.
It's not just about grabbing students' attention.
Right.
It's about making the learning relevant and meaningful.
Okay.
It should spark curiosity, pique their interest, and create a sense of anticipation.
It's like the trailer for a movie. You want to give the audience a taste of what's to come.
Exactly. One of our sources suggested presenting students with an intriguing real-world problem or case study.
Oh, interesting.
Another idea was to use a provocative or funny quotation related to the lesson.
I've also seen teachers use multimedia clips or music.
Oh.
Or even role-playing activities to hook their students.
There are so many creative possibilities.
There really are.
The key is to choose a hook that's relevant to the lesson's content.
Right.
And that will genuinely engage your students.
You want to tap into their interests.
Yes.
And make them curious to learn more.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got our hook now.
Wow.
How do we structure the rest of the lesson to maximize learning?
That's where the balance between direct instruction and student-directed learning comes in.
Right.
Our sources emphasized that both approaches are valuable and have their place.
Right. We talked about that earlier. Direct instruction is like laying the foundation.
Yes.
Student-directed learning is like allowing students to build on that foundation and create their own structures.
Exactly. It's like learning to ride a bike. At first, you need someone to hold you steady and guide you.
Right.
But eventually, you need to let go of the handlebars and ride on your own.
It's about gradually releasing responsibility
Yes.
to students as they gain confidence and competence.
One of our sources talked about the I do, we do, you do model,
Oh, yes.
which is a great example of this gradual release of responsibility.
Right. First, the teacher models the skill or concept.
Yes.
Then the teacher and students practice together.
Together.
And finally, students practice independently with the teacher providing support and feedback as needed.
It's a really effective way to scaffold learning and help students move from dependence to independence.
So what are some examples of student-directed learning activities?
Our sources suggested several great ideas, such as contributing to a class Padlet, or creating videos,
Oh, cool.
or even developing their own test questions.
I love those ideas. They all encourage students to think critically, be creative, and take ownership of their learning.
Exactly. But as one of our sources cautioned, we need to be careful not to fall into the trap of Pinterest planning,
Oh, Pinterest planning.
where we prioritize cute and creative activities over actual learning objectives.
It's so easy to get caught up in the aesthetics of a lesson
It is.
and lose sight of the substance.
We need to make sure that our activities are aligned with our learning objectives
Right.
and are actually helping students achieve those objectives.
It's about finding that sweet spot
Yes.
between engagement and rigor.
Speaking of objectives, one of our sources had a great point about the importance of verbs.
Verbs.
They said that the verb should clearly indicate the mental workout the lesson entails.
Okay.
It should communicate the expected student performance, which helps map out assessments.
So instead of just saying students will learn about fractions,
Right.
we might say students will be able to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators.
Exactly. That clarity helps ensure that our lessons are focused and purposeful.
Okay.
And it helps us design assessments that accurately measure student learning.
And of course, no lesson plan is ever truly finished.
Never.
We need to constantly reflect, revise, and improve based on what we observe in the classroom.
Absolutely. One of our sources had a great tip about jotting down those brilliant examples or explanations that we come up with on the fly.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
That way we can use them again in the future.
It's like building a library of teaching wisdom.
Exactly. And it's important to revise our test questions and rubrics.
As we see how students are performing.
As we see how students are performing, we're always learning and growing as teachers, just as our students are learning and growing.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about building a strong classroom community.
Okay.
Our sources emphasized establishing clear procedures and routines
Yes.
to create a predictable and structured environment.
It's like having a well-oiled machine. when everyone knows what to expect and how to behave.
Right.
Things run more smoothly, and there's more time for learning.
One of our sources gave the simple example of teaching students how to line up by number.
Oh, yeah.
It might seem like a small thing, but it can actually save a lot of time and prevent a lot of chaos.
And those saved minutes can then be used for more valuable learning activities. Yeah. It's all about maximizing efficiency and creating a positive learning environment.
Another important aspect of community building is creating a positive and supportive classroom culture.
Absolutely. Our sources talked about recognizing and reinforcing positive behaviors, celebrating successes, and creating opportunities for students to connect with each other.
It's about fostering a sense of belonging and making students feel valued and respected.
One source had a fascinating point about the power of unexpected rewards.
Oh, tell me more.
They explained how dopamine, which plays a key role in learning and motivation, is released when we experience something unexpected and pleasurable.
So instead of offering predictable rewards like a sticker for every completed assignment, we should try to surprise students with unexpected praise or recognition.
Exactly. It's like that feeling of excitement you get when you win a prize you weren't expecting.
Oh, yeah.
That feeling can actually help to strengthen those neural connections associated with learning.
Our sources also talked about addressing the imposter syndrome, which is that feeling of inadequacy that so many students experience, especially in challenging subjects.
It's important to let students know that those feelings are normal.
Absolutely.
And that even the most successful people sometimes feel like they're not good enough.
We all have those moments.
We do. We need to normalize those feelings and help students develop strategies for overcoming them.
One of our sources suggested having students create a brag folder where they collect evidence of their accomplishments and progress.
That's a great idea. It helps students focus on their strengths and see how far they've come.
Yeah.
It's a tangible reminder of their growth and potential.
Our sources also emphasized using collaborative learning to build social skills and reduce stress.
When done well, collaborative learning can create a sense of belonging, provide opportunities for peer support and feedback, and even help to buffer the negative effects of stress on learning.
Wow, so it's actually physiological.
It is one source mentioned that the social buffering provided by supportive group members can actually reduce stress hormone levels.
Wow.
When students encounter new and difficult tasks.
It's remarkable how much our social and emotional well-being can impact our ability to learn.
It highlights the importance of creating a classroom environment where students feel safe, supported, and connected to each other.
Absolutely. We're not just teaching content. We're nurturing the whole child.
That's right, yeah.
We're helping them develop the social, emotional, and academic skills they need to thrive in school and in life.
Now let's transition to the world of online learning.
Oh, yes, online learning.
Our sources had a wealth of information on how to engage students in the virtual realm.
One of the key principles is multimedia learning, right?
Yes, engaging both auditory and visual channels for stronger learning.
That's right. It's like watching a movie with a great soundtrack.
Exactly. The combination of sights and sounds creates a more immersive and memorable experience.
Our sources had some great tips for creating effective multimedia materials.
They did.
Like what? I'm always looking for ways to make my online lessons more engaging.
Well, they suggested using clear and concise language, incorporating visuals, and keeping videos short and focused.
Makes sense.
One source recommended aiming for videos around 5 minutes in length.
Okay.
With at least a minute or two where the teacher is visible on screen.
That makes sense. You want to keep students engaged without overwhelming them with too much information.
Exactly. And don't forget about creating a sense of presence in online learning.
Oh, present.
Even though we're not physically present with our students, we can still make them feel seen, heard, and valued.
So how do we do that?
How do we do that?
It seems like it would be easy for students to feel disconnected and isolated in an online environment.
One source suggested sending weekly emails to students.
Okay.
Recapping the week's work, providing information about upcoming assignments, and even sharing a personal anecdote or two.
I like that.
It's about making those connections and building relationships, even in a virtual space.
It's about reminding students that there's a real person on the other side of the screen
who cares about their learning and well-being.
Yes, and don't be afraid to get creative with your online teaching.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about using interactive activities, games, virtual field trips.
Guest speakers.
Oh, guest speakers.
To keep things interesting and engaging.
Our sources also had some great tips for getting those reticent students to participate in online learning.
They did. They suggested reaching out to those students individually.
Okay.
Checking in with their guardians. And even consulting with other teachers or guidance counselors.
It's about being proactive and persistent
Yes.
in supporting all learners.
We can't just assume that students will reach out to us if they're struggling.
We need to be the ones to reach out.
We need to be the ones to reach out and let them know we're there to help.
And it's important to pay attention to the quality of our audio and video in online learning.
Yes, poor audio or video quality can be a major distraction for students.
Absolutely.
And can make it difficult for them to focus on the content.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the content of our lessons and forget about those technical aspects.
But those technical details can make a big difference.
They can.
In the overall learning experience.
One source had a great tip about watching out for crutch words.
Crutch words?
Those words we use over and over again without even realizing it.
Oh, like,
Exactly. It's so easy to fall into those verbal habits, especially when we're nervous or under pressure.
Yeah.
But those crutch words can be really distracting for students.
Absolutely.
They suggested recording ourselves and listening back.
Oh, yeah.
To identify our crutch words so we can start to eliminate them.
That's a good idea. It's a great way to improve our communication skills both online and in the traditional classroom.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about using both synchronous and asynchronous teaching in online learning.
Okay.
What are the benefits of each approach?
Well, synchronous teaching, like live video conferences, allows for more immediate interaction and feedback.
Okay.
Students can ask questions in real time and get clarification on the spot.
That makes sense. It's more like a traditional classroom setting in that
Oh.
way. It is but asynchronous teaching, where students access materials and complete assignments at their own pace.
Right.
Allows for more flexibility and personalization.
Okay.
Students can learn when and where it's most convenient for them, and they can revisit materials as needed.
That's a huge benefit for students who have busy schedules or who learn at different paces.
It gives them more control over their learning experience.
Our sources suggested using a blended approach, incorporating both synchronous and asynchronous elements into online courses.
Yes, one of our sources had a fun idea for a synchronous activity.
Okay.
They suggested playing Simon Says
Simon Says.
to familiarize students with the online platform and the teacher's procedures.
I love that it's a great way to break the ice, have some fun, and get students comfortable with the technology.
Exactly. And for asynchronous activities, our sources suggested using a variety of formats like short videos,
Okay.
quizzes, discussion forums, and even interactive simulations.
It's about keeping things fresh and engaging.
Yes, and don't forget about assessment.
Right. Assess.
Just as in the traditional classroom, we need to constantly check for understanding, provide feedback, and make adjustments to our instruction in the online environment.
Our sources suggested using a variety of assessment tools like quizzes, discussion forums, and even peer feedback.
The key is to make sure that our assessments are aligned with our learning objectives and are actually measuring what we want them to measure.
It's all about being thoughtful and intentional in our approach to online learning.
It is.
It's not just about throwing content online and hoping for the best.
No.
It's about creating a structured, supportive, and engaging learning experience for our students,
Yes.
even in a virtual environment.
And it's about being open to learning ourselves as teachers.
Absolutely.
The world of online learning is constantly evolving, and we need to be willing to adapt, experiment, and try new things.
There's always room for growth and improvement.
Always.
You know, as we've been talking about all these different aspects of learning, one thing keeps coming back to me, and that's mindset. It seems like it underpins so much of what we've discussed.
It really does. Our sources touched on the idea of growth mindset, which is the belief that our abilities aren't fixed. They can be developed through effort and learning.
So instead of saying, I'm just not a math person,
Right.
you'd approach math with the belief that you can get better with practice and the right strategies.
Exactly. It's about embracing challenges, seeing setbacks as opportunities to learn, and viewing mistakes as stepping stones rather than roadblocks.
It sounds like growth mindset is the fuel that powers the learning engine.
I love that analogy.
But how do we actually cultivate this mindset?
One of our sources highlighted the importance of language. Instead of praising talent or intelligence, we should focus on praising effort and strategy.
Okay.
So instead of saying, you're so smart,
Right.
you might say, you really stuck with that problem and found a creative solution.
So it's about shifting the focus from innate ability to the process of learning and growing.
Exactly.
This reminds me of that point about desirable difficulty. If we always stick to what's easy, we're not really stretching ourselves or giving our brains the workout they need.
That's a great connection. Growth mindset is all about embracing those challenges and seeing them as opportunities for growth. It's like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
I'm realizing that a fixed mindset can be really limiting. If you believe your intelligence is set in stone, you're less likely to take risks or try new things.
Absolutely. And that fixed mindset can also impact how we respond to feedback. Instead of seeing constructive criticism as a chance to learn and improve, someone with a fixed mindset might take it personally and feel discouraged.
One of our sources talked about the importance of normalizing mistakes.
Yes.
They suggested creating a classroom culture where it's okay to make mistakes and where students feel comfortable asking for help.
That's so crucial. When we create a safe and supportive learning environment, students are more likely to take risks, experiment, and stretch themselves beyond their comfort zones.
It's about shifting the focus from performance to progress. It's not about being perfect. It's about constantly striving to learn and grow.
Well said. And that's a message that resonates far beyond the classroom. It's a message that can empower all of us to live more fulfilling and meaningful lives. It's about recognizing that learning is not just something we do in school. It's a fundamental part of who we are as human beings.
It's what allows us to adapt, grow, and thrive in a world that's constantly changing. And as we've seen in this deep dive, there are so many tools and strategies we can use to make that learning journey more effective and enjoyable.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Yeah, what does it mean for me?
If learning truly is a skill, and our sources certainly suggest it is, then it's something we can all get better at with practice.
It's about being mindful of how we approach learning, using the strategies we've discussed, and cultivating that growth mindset.
Yeah.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
There are amazing resources out there, like the books and articles you shared, that can provide guidance and support. But it also goes beyond books and articles. Talk to other learners, join online communities, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Learning is a collaborative process.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the power of intentional learning. I'm feeling inspired to apply these insights to my own life and to share them with others.
That's fantastic. Remember, learning is not just about acquiring knowledge. It's about using that knowledge to make a positive impact on the world.
So keep these brains engaged, keep those learning journeys going, and keep diving deep